This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Tripp Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
All right, welcome to the podcast, guys. It's great to have David back on. We're going to pick up from where we left off last time. We talked about the great financial crisis. We heard kind of the background of Tim and David getting into the business, and excited that now we're going to talk about a time that I was actually working with the guys. So back when I joined the team, and a lot of what happened since then. So guys, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Excited to be here.
So we, and if you didn't listen to that last episode, make sure to tune in. A lot of really good content, good stories. What was probably one of the most difficult times in the industry, since the 80s, like Tim mentioned in that podcast. So as the guys were talking about that last time, I was thinking about what I was doing in 2008. And I actually remember I was on a run on my way to the rec center at Texas A&M. I was a freshman, and I was listening to like a sermon. I don't remember if they had podcasts back then, but I think I was listening to like a sermon, and they were talking about, just the devastation of what was happening in the stock market, what was happening to people's retirement. And I was just like, wow, this is pretty crazy. I'm actually really glad right now that I'm studying to be a business student, and I'm not trying to go get a job right now. And was thankful that I didn't graduate until 2011. And by 2011, things had started to change, and I actually got a job in an investment banking firm in Houston that focused on oil and gas. And so that part of the industry was doing pretty good at that time. I had interned at ARA with Tim and David, but on the investment sales side back in 2010. So I knew real estate was something I was interested in, but there just wasn't really an opportunity when I graduated in 2011. The market hadn't come back enough yet to really justify hiring on either the investment sales or the land side. And so did investment banking for a while. And then Tim and David, I don't know if you guys remember, but we would go to lunch like every couple months. And I don't remember where it was, but there was like a little hole in the wall spot that we would meet up, and you guys would tell me how much you loved your job, even though the deals were tough, and all these exciting projects you were working on. And then I would talk about like spreadsheets and stuff that I was doing that really wasn't that exciting. Do you guys remember that?
I do. I think it was Burritos was at least one of the places we went to. But yeah, I remember meeting with you and talking about what you were doing, and we were trying to get you to come over to be with us and do what we were doing. And that was right as things were really starting to come back, and we were getting a lot more deals on the listing side and the buyer up side, and the market was opening up a lot. I mean, Texas was starting to come back, but especially Houston was really coming back with oil prices coming up so much. And I'm assuming your job was still probably pretty good though, because you were an oil and gas investment banking firm. So that was probably a good time for that business as well.
Yeah, they were doing well. They were selling companies. We were doing M&A, and so they had good business coming in, and it was a small firm, so it was a good opportunity to learn. But I realized that, although I could do the financial analysis, that wasn't really my passion or really a strength. I was able to do it. That was my degree at A&M. But when I met with both of you and heard about just the relationships, different developers you were talking about different properties you were working on, that all to me just sounded so interesting. Something that was a lot more tangible than really what I was doing. And so I remember really thinking about it. And when you guys first approached me, and it was less of a catch up and it was more of, hey, this is a real opportunity. We think the market's coming back. We'd like to grow our team. I had to decide, did I want to leave investment banking? It was going to be a pay cut, but I wasn't really enjoying the work. And so really the enjoyment you guys had and what you were doing was a big part of it. And then I think you both helped me look longer term to say it's going to be okay to take a pay cut now, because within real estate, there's just so much more upside in the future, and you're really not capped, if you can come in and add value. And so I had that opportunity that you guys provided for me. And like you said, Tim, on the last episode, the market really responded. And so that really started the actual recovery in 2012.
What was your perspective of the land business just coming in, with your background in finance and investment banking, and then some of the investment sales side as an intern, and then seeing what we did on the land side? What was kind of your initial perspective on it?
That's a good question, because when I first started, I don't know that I really understood it very well. I interned at ARA on the investment sales side, so I had some understanding of, multifamily and how they valued multifamily deals and underwriting multifamily deals and all of that. But when it came to land, it was really interesting to me just trying to figure out what actually makes a deal make sense and how do these deals get put together, because it was a lot of meetings and conversations, but I didn't really fully understand like the business side of it. And I remember sitting down my first day, and we were at ARA and we were kind of in the back, and there was this weird conference room that I was in that was like in between both of your offices, and there were sliding doors on either side.
I remember that, yeah.
And so I was in there, and you guys were both coming through the sliding doors constantly. And it was amazing how you guys were constantly working with each other, talking about deals. Everything was both of you on the phone, talking to clients. I remember one of the first calls I listened in on was Odin Hughes was doing one of their first projects in Houston. So I was trying to get familiar with like, who's Odin Hughes and how does this work and what's a developer, and just had a lot of questions. And I remember we sat in that little conference room in between the offices, and you guys started talking about Exxon and how Exxon was going to open their big, I guess it was going to be their national headquarters in the US and bring like 10,000 employees. I can't remember the exact range because there was all these different ranges of how many employees they were going to bring, but it was like 10,000 or more. And we had this big wall map on the wall, and we were just looking up at the Woodlands and Spring and where they were coming. And you guys were explaining to me the Grand Parkway and how that was going to be built. And so I started just trying to think about like, what is it within this business that actually makes it a business where we can take information and then we can go try to almost create deals. And I think that was something I learned from you guys early on that was different from traditional land brokerage, is we can actually go create our own deals. And traditional land brokerage is a little bit more about you get a listing and you put a sign up and then you try to sell a property like you would by, getting a listing on a house and selling a house. And you guys had said, just drive around town. And I remember driving around town with you guys. And if a property looks like it's run down, call on it, and we should put a developer on it to knock it down and build. And fortunately at that time, there was that kind of demand, to actually go redevelop things. You could actually get, financing, you could get equity, you could get debt. So deals could happen. It was a huge adjustment from investment banking where everything was like very dialed in, spreadsheets. And I learned a lot in that job about not making mistakes and how important it was to be professional, to be detail oriented, to track what you were doing, data. And so a lot of that I was able to bring on pretty early by trying to take all the incredible knowledge you guys had and say, how can we put this in spreadsheets? How can we start creating more processes?
I was going to say, I wish I could remember the sales pitch we had to get you to come over and work with us, on the heels of the Great Recession. It must have been a heck of a sales pitch.
It was pretty soft from what I remember meeting. Like, you guys were not pushy at all. Like, for the longest time when we were meeting, I thought you guys just wanted to meet up, which was probably the truth. But if you were from the beginning intending to bring me on, it didn't come across like that. It was really more like we just wanted to. You just graduated college. I got married at that same time. And so I had a lot of change in my life, and you guys were just trying to be supportive. And I think you just saw that I wasn't probably enjoying the work very much. And it was, come work with us. And it's very entrepreneurial. It's a lot of fun. It's the people you work with every day. I remember Matt Rotan told me when I was an intern, the most important thing about your first job is who you're working with and the reputation. And, Rotan always had certain things that were just, whenever he told them to you, it was like the most important thing he was ever communicating was that one thing. But that stuck with me for all these years. So the opportunity to go work with you guys, and then I had a lot of respect for ARA already. David Mitchell had been the one that had hired me as an intern, and really incredible guy. And so I just had a lot of respect for everyone at ARA. And so the thought of getting to go work there again, I think it was something I was excited to do because I'd already been somewhat involved.
Yeah, and I was going to say, it's interesting. You think about the cycles in our business and how much the market changes. So we were coming on the heels of just a death zone where nothing could happen. There's no deals. There's no capital. Developers are on the sidelines. And then you talk about 2011, but really 2012 to 2014, how it was just a radically different market. There's high-rise deals going up. Like you're saying, Exxon's going in the Woodlands area. There's the Grand Parkways coming through. There's all these tracks that are opening up for development. There's just a ton of transactions. And, as a team, we did a lot of deals. We did a lot of suburban deals all over the place. I think you said maybe 15 or 20 deals in that Woodlands pocket.
Yeah.
Because that was just a super hot pocket. Even doing wrap deals, structured parking deals up in the Woodlands. not in the Woodlands proper, but outside the Woodlands in proximity to Exxon, just because of all that people are looking forward to with both the Grand Parkway and Exxon coming in. But then at the same time, these high-rise deals in the Interloop area, areas like Montrose and Greenway, the Galleria, different pockets where we saw incredible transactions. I remember, I think in Midtown, the highest sales comp was in the $30 to $40 a foot range, kind of prior to the Great Recession. And then coming out of the recession, we saw tracts trading in the 80 to 100 range. Then within maybe a year or two, as high as like 160 a foot, which was just like kind of blew everybody's mind. How can this happen? How can prices change so fast? And I think it kind of goes back to what we said before about to stay in something and to not ever, the market will not always be the way the market is right now. And I think it's tempting, whether it's a down cycle or it's a boom cycle, to think it's always going to be this way, and it's always changing. And so the fact we were able to stay and survive, we went from a 2-person team to a larger team and got some really quality people at the right time to take advantage of a boom cycle, and then had some great clients to go be successful in all those deals.
Yeah, I remember it was during that time period. I can't remember if it was you or me. We were given a presentation at one of the O'Connor luncheons. And I remember in the presentation, it had a list of the presentation that one of us was giving, had a list of the high-rises, rental apartment high-rises here in Houston, Texas. And you could, almost count them on one hand. But the number of proposed high-rises that were either being proposed to develop or under construction was like, a multiple of 4. But it was just unbelievable to see how drastic the market had moved in such a short period of time. A lot of those did not get done, but a lot of them did get done.
Yeah, I remember early on there was suburban areas like Katy and the Woodlands, Spring, that, like you said, Tim, we just basically said we're going to go do every deal we can do. And I took it for granted at the time that ARA's reputation was so incredible, and they were recognized in Houston as, by far the most successful investment sales multifamily company in Houston with, over 50% market share. So we basically had just a revolving door of developers coming in to meet. And so, I learned early on just some of the questions to ask the developers to understand what they wanted. And then you guys were out working a lot of listings and doing some representation of developers, but a lot of listings. And I think a big part of bringing me on was just having more capacity to go, if we didn't have something the developers liked on the listing side, let's go create something on the buyer side. I didn't realize at the time, but having all of those developers as just built-in clients, like we had no need for buyers. We had every buyer we wanted coming into the office. We had Trammell Crow, we had Alliance, we had Mill Creek, all these, successful developers like Greystar. The apartment realty guys were doing a lot with Greystar. And so we got to do projects with them like all across Houston. And so it was really fun because they would say, we want to be in the Washington corridor. I remember that was really hot at the time. We want to be in Katy. We want to be in the Woodlands area. We want to be in Midtown. And then it started to be the Heights because the Washington corridor got expensive and it got difficult to find opportunities. And so it moved north of I-10. And around the same time that we represented a family in selling their property that you guys worked on and sold it to Trammell Crow off Yale Street, we represented JLB in building a project, what was considered, way north in the Heights. I think that was up at 24th Street and
24th, 25th.
Around Shepherd, and just a really kind of rough area at the time. And it's only been 10 years. And now, there's so many developments all around that. There's developments that break the high-rise code there that have been there already for 5-6 years. And there's the mixed-use HEB and so many. But we were a part of so many of those sales. What was it like for both of you? Because when I came into the business, there was just interest to go there. But for you, that was probably a huge adjustment because you just had never seen people wanting to go into that part of town.
Yeah. Tom, talking about the JLB deal, I remember we drove them by that site 2 times, over a course of maybe, 8 to 12 months. And the first 2 times they were like, no, we're not doing this. This is not where we want to be. And then that 3rd time we drove them by it, they said, okay, I think we might be able to do this. And that area has just changed drastically, but it was interesting during that short time period. It took us driving them by 3 times and touring the market to get them on board to do it. And it was a very successful project for them. And, at the time they were able to buy that land at what seemed like a high price, but looking back, seems like they got an extremely good deal on it.
Well, I mean, literally, we've sold land across the street now, since then for 5 times, literally 5x what they paid for that site. And so I remember them being super apprehensive because it was pioneering. There wasn't really a lot there. But now it's some of the highest rents in Houston. And I think that's a good point about the land business. If you want to be a good land broker, on the listing side, this isn't as important because you just get a listing, like you said, and you sell it. On the buyer rep side, understanding these little submarkets and where the next move is, the next opportunity. Where's the market moving? Where's it going to be in 2 years or in 3 years? Developers are they're looking out a couple of years in the market. Where does everybody want to live? Where are rents going to be? Where's supply going to be? All those kind of things. And so as land brokers, we've learned over the years to target what are the areas that are on the periphery, but they're going to be the good market in a couple of years. And a lot of times it's taken our clients a couple of years to figure out that we were right. And we've been proved right sometimes, or it took us like 3 or 4 years trying to sell a site. Remember that Riverstone site down in Sugar Land? David and I were just like for 3 or 4 years driving people back in there, telling them like, this is a deal. You got to do this deal. Nobody wanted to do it. And then finally a group did it and just crushed it on that deal. I think that's part of what makes especially a buyer rep land broker successful is having the credibility with your client to say, hey, you need to go do this deal. And we're actually right about it. There's probably a lot of brokers who do it and they're not right, but I think we had good reasons for why it was going to be a good play. And they were very successful on that deal.
Well, so even in those first couple years that I was on the team, the kind of 2012 to 2014, before the oil crisis in Houston, there was a lot of really pretty incredible projects we got to work on that we did. I mean, one was the Heinz high-rise in the Museum District, which was the first high-rise deal that I was a part of, the Southmore, which was just neat to do something with Heinz. We got to meet with Gerald Heinz. I think you guys...
That was an assemblage, right?
That was an assemblage, yeah. We could do an episode on holdouts because that was an example of there ended up being a holdout that now has like a 26 or 27 story high-rise right next to their house. And the Heinz guys did everything they could to, pay a premium for that holdout just to get him out of there. But, we got to meet with Gerald Heinz as a part of that, which was a pretty neat experience. I mean, him passing away now a couple of years ago, but just a incredible developer that spent almost all of his career in Houston. It was a huge part of Houston. That's another just part of the business that I was so attracted to was the opportunity to meet people. Didn't really expect to get to meet him. I think that was a huge privilege, but we've gotten to meet so many other people that are incredible people, landowners, developers. But that was a special one because of that. And to talk about the Kirby deal, because I feel like we had done so many core listings. We had already done deals that we talked about in the last episode, several high rises, but the Kirby deal was really unique because I think in all of Houston, that probably continues to remain a corridor. Like you said, David, things shift around, but that's kind of like the build to core corridor that just is always A++.
Yeah, we got the opportunity to list 6 acres, roughly 6 acres, for a family who owned that land there on Kirby, and they own a bunch of land along Kirby, and they'd owned it for 50 plus years. And it was a very, very unique opportunity to get to list a property of that size, not only on Kirby, but a property of that size on Kirby. And because of the size of it and kind of the pricing expectations, it was very difficult for it to be one transaction. So it ended up being multiple transactions, 3, and we subdivided it up and sold it to 3 different developers. One of the transactions was to a condo developer out of Atlanta, Georgia, a gentleman by the name of Will Stoles, who built the Giorgetti. One of the other transactions was a sale to Hanover, who built a 40-story high-rise apartment tower with some ground floor retail. And then the third sale was the southern portion of the property, which was almost 3 acres, right there at the northwest corner of West Alabama and Kirby. We sold it to HEB, and they haven't built their store yet there, but just a prime location for a HEB store. And when they bought it, their plans was to do a mixed-use development They've put that kind of on the back burner for the time being. It was an unbelievable opportunity to get the chance to work on a site like that, to work for a family like that. And it was a fun one to work on. But during that whole process of selling it, we went through the oil bust of 2014-15. And y'all are going to have to jump in and remind me the exact dates. But, oil went to negative, was it 30?
I think that was during COVID and was negative 30, but it dropped into, I think, the high 20s.
High 20s.
So this was the end of 2014. Saudi Arabia decided to try and shut down, the shale patch in the Permian. And so there's this price war that happened where they started just producing all this oil. And so oil had gotten, I think, to 150 or something. It kind of spiked up, in the years before that. It was probably somewhere in the $100 range in 2014, like in the summer. And then it just started to come down from there. And when they announced that price war, oil really fell, went into the high 20s, and everybody just panicked. All the institutional buyers, panicked about Houston. The developers, had to drop deals. We were very fortunate at that point on this deal to be in our contract with Hanover. They already had a lot invested in the deal. They're going to build a really cool development, a 40-story high-rise. It's still, I think, one of the prettiest deals I've seen built in Houston. But they were a long way away from capitalizing that deal. I mean, we're talking about a couple $100 million development deal in that kind of an environment, with the land price and just how expensive the building was going to be. And so we were able to negotiate with them and the family to get them to put up a good amount of hard money and to be able to extend that contract till they get it capitalized and basically keep that pricing for the family and get a deal done, during that downturn period, which is a brutal time where those kind of deals weren't closing, which then set them up after that to transact on the rest of the property. But it was fun, like David said. They're a family that had owned it for over 100 years. They'd owned a lot of that really valuable land from River Oaks down into kind of the Rice area, Rice Village area, and it was their old dairy farm. And so we were dealing with probably the third generation. The family was still, very involved in the Houston local people, and getting to talk to them about their property and about what was going to go on their property. They definitely cared a little bit more about not just selling it and getting a good price, but leaving a little bit of a legacy and having it be a neat development, something that they could be proud of, that they could point to as a family. And I think that's definitely what happened. I mean, both the deals were built are beautiful buildings and really impressive developments.
Yeah, that was an amazing example of just the importance of picking the right buyers on a tract. Because as easy as you might think it is to sell 6 acres on Kirby, to separate it into 3 tracts, 3 different uses, simultaneously do that, and then to maximize the pricing, and hit really record pricing that had never been seen before outside of probably downtown Houston on land. That was an incredible accomplishment, and I think something that we've always been able to bring to the table because of our experience on the buyer rep side and just working with so many of these developers is understanding where their money comes from and if they actually can close. And also just understanding like how a condo deal works. The Will Stoltz deal was, I think, average price point back then was like $2 million per condo. I mean, these are really nice condos that he was building, and understanding he'd been successful on another property, and we knew him really well and knew that he was a serious buyer, and he did what he said he would do. And HEB was a surprise because, they paid a huge number. And like you said, David, they haven't broken ground yet, but that ended up being a great sale for the family. And it's neat that we get to work with families. Sometimes it's on suburban properties from 1800s that they've owned them, and sometimes it's families in urban areas. There was the family in the Heights that I mentioned earlier that we sold property to Trammell Crow, and that was their business. I think they had started that business in the Heights. It was an industrial facility in like the 1940s, and they've been operating since the 1940s. And so for them, it was the property, it was the proceeds, but we were dealing with multiple generations of the family that were very involved. They really cared about who they were dealing with. Fortunately, it was the Trammell Crow guys that were our, incredible developers. But that's a neat part of what we get to do is just the relational side of we get to know these landowners really well through these transactions that we do, but there's so much more than transactions.
Yeah, and for them, it's a very emotional decision because for a lot of these families, it was different on the Kirby asset because this family had a lot of other assets. They're a very wealthy family, but a lot of these families we deal with, this land is like their 401k. It's their savings. It's, most of their net worth is tied up in the property that they own. And so selling it is a really big deal, and trying to make sure they're maximizing the price, looking at transaction risks, not being dropped, just a lot of those things. And it's very stressful. I mean, I can just think of so many different families where we're in the conference room with them and we're making these difficult decisions, and they're obviously the ones, it's their decision. So we're giving them our input and, tell them what we think from our experience. But, they're making the decision. Who do we go with? Who do we pick? Sometimes the developers are really close on the price and terms, and just kind of walking through that with people is neat to be in that position, get to be a part of that.
Well, it's an emotional thing. I mean, you look at buying and selling a house, a lot of times that's the biggest thing, biggest transaction, most families will ever have. Well, this is a multitude, quite a bit larger, typically larger transaction, and there's a lot of emotional attachment to it. In both cases, this is land that it's been in the family for generations. And so, it's important to them that, they obviously, are good stewards of this land that's been handed down from generation to generation. And so it's a very emotional decision for them.
Mm-hmm. And around that time when we had the oil crisis hit, I just remember specifically October 2014 was around the time where we started seeing an impact on our deals. And I remember tracking like 100 deals that fell out of contract, not all of our deals, but just across the market, and it was like from that date until I think the end of the first quarter in 2015. And something we had really started to work on as a team at that point was, how do we leverage technology more, because we're growing. And so it was also around that time that the Newmark sale happened. So ARA sold to Newmark. We hired actually Tim and my sister Becky. Becky worked for us until she started a family. So Becky, we poached her from BP. She was same thing. She was incredible, grad at A&M, finance department, and then really sharp. And somebody got another company to train her up for about a year, and then she came over and she was an incredible part of the team. So we had Becky. We had, I think, 2 other employees that we had brought on at the time. And so we wanted to really just scale what we were doing. And so there was a need to be able to track data better. And we didn't have the tools we have today, which we'll talk about that when we talk about starting DMRE and just our commitment to investing in our own technology. But I think what was good is we saw ARA trying to invest in technology, and we saw that it really wasn't a fit for the land business and what we were trying to do. And we learned a lot about, if you're going to go and invest in technology, it's extremely expensive, and there's good and bad ways to do it. And we also just started trying things. And so we went from spreadsheets to, different PowerPoint to Google Earth to Google My Maps, and the evolution of the way we would sit down and present opportunities to clients. But we realized we were looking at so many sites across the entire market. And then we had now, 6 team members. And so we needed to be able to take the information that both of you had and then the information I was gaining and be able to transmit that across the team, because we wanted to be able to do as many deals as we could. We always were trying to say, how can we do every development deal we can? And a lot of times our competitors would say, those guys are just multifamily guys. We actually lost a couple listings because that was the way that we were pitched against, was, well, they only do multifamily deals. Funny thing is, in Houston with no zoning, you really want to sell for the highest price, and multifamily is what was paying the highest price. So we had all the big comps, all the big sales, but we were doing a lot more than multi. I'll let you speak to that, Tim, because I know you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done, I think in our history, I think it is pretty high percentage of multifamily deals, maybe like 50%, maybe it's like 40% now, but obviously we've done everything. We've done, grocery anchored deals, all kinds of retail deals, some big office deals, some hospital deals,
industrial,
a lot of industrial, a lot of single family, kind of large acreage deals, investment tracts, self-storage deals, seniors deals. I think we've always been good at taking what the market gave us. And so you go through these cycles, whether it's an up cycle or a down cycle, where are the deals happening? Who's doing the deals? And we would go find out who that was and figure out how we could help them, find the best deals in the market. And I think we've really, a big foundation for our business has been the buyer rep side of the business and being really good at that, being market leaders and kind of the go-to people. If you want to go find a deal, come talk to these guys, and we can show you everything in the market, everything that's off market, everything that's on market, have the best data, know all the comps, really help people, smooth out kind of that process of locating those sites and find the right opportunity. And so, like you said, in Houston, a lot of that was multifamily because we went through a cycle where they were paying 2 times what anyone else would pay on a lot of these sites. And so they were the group you want to deal with, or the use you want to deal with. But it just depends on the deal and the location.
There's a deal I remember that we worked on that straddled that oil crisis, and it was with Allen Harrison in the Heights. It was right next to the Boy Scouts campus. So if you drive by it today on 610, it's fully developed. But I gained so much respect for the Allen Harrison team during that time because it was such a difficult time in the market. I remember I spoke in 2015 at I think it was a CCIM event. It was similar to what you talked about last episode, Tim. It was a debate with another land broker where we talked about what we were predicting to happen in the market and where we were seeing land prices. And I remember a couple of the things that I mentioned, and one was that there was just no debt for development in Houston. The Allen Harrison guys had a great site, a really good plan. It was a great location for apartments, and they had to talk to 75 banks to get one term sheet, and they ended up getting the deal done. And I think, if I remember right, that deal and maybe one other deal were like the only 2 multifamily deals that actually closed in 2015, just because the market had been so impacted at that point. And then the other thing that I mentioned at that event was at the same time, we were seeing some of the highest prices being offered in Midtown. And so it was around that time that we helped a group out of Australia come into the market that had been very successful in Australia and basically said, there's not a whole lot more we can do here. We want to go find the next Melbourne. We think that could be Houston. We think it could be Midtown. And so we helped them go into Midtown. And to your point, Tim, using kind of the buyer rep side of our business, we basically mapped out all of Midtown. We had relationships with a lot of the significant landowners and helped them select different sites that they then went and acquired. And what was pretty incredible was even during a depression in the market, the pricing they paid was probably 40% higher than anything that had ever been paid in Midtown. It was around the same time we closed a deal that became a high rise with PM Realty that was put under contract prior to this Australian group coming into the market. But it was really interesting, and we talk a lot about that. Even in downturns, well-located land that's in demand, a lot of times the value doesn't actually go down. It's more about if a developer like this group has a requirement like they did, they were willing to pay almost whatever it took to get a hold of that land.
Yeah, that was an incredible deal. I think it might be good to talk a little bit about just kind of the shift that we made as a team. We had this incredible boom cycle, 2012 to 2014, where we were growing the team. And then around that time, we got some news that I think we saw, kind of negatively at the time because it just kind of disrupted our status quo. But the ARA was going to be sold to this other company. I think they were called NGKF at the time, a big global real estate firm. We had to kind of work through that process. I think it probably felt a little bit scary for all of us because everything was kind of working the way it was. Things were good. We had a really good run, with a good market. And so now you had a tougher market we were going into and potentially just a new structure with a lot of, the kind of leadership being out of New York, not being down the hall like it had been, moving office locations, being with another company kind of merged together in kind of a bigger corporate setting. So maybe we could kind of talk about that, what we were kind of feeling going through that time, getting to be a part of that sale. I think we learned a lot going through that sale, just negotiating the legal documents, understanding what we were agreeing to, all that. And then I think that was maybe the first time that we thought about could our team become a company? And this is in 2014. So we didn't start DMRE until 2017. So it's 3 years earlier. But I think that was a pretty formative process to start having those conversations. I think we had a really healthy relationship with the leadership at ARA. We respected them a lot. So we had some very open conversations. We wanted to stay with them and keep working with them. And so we structured a deal where we did keep working with them and stayed at the new company and got to work for several more years there. But I think that was kind of the beginning of that process of, just the idea, could we go have our own company? And I think that was probably outside of all of our comfort zones at the time, but maybe we talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So that transaction happened in November, December of 2014. And like Tim mentioned, we went over to NGKF with the sale. At the time, it was Tim, Tom, and I, and we had 4 more people on our team. So we had 7 people on our team. So, a good-sized team for what we were doing, and we were just covering Houston, Texas at the time. But it was kind of the genesis of kind of us starting to kick around the idea of, Are we long-term here, or we want to start our own deal? Even though we really liked where we were and, had a great relationship with the partners at ARA, we also wanted to diversify geographically. I think that was very important to us, especially being in the land brokerage business. Houston's definitely got its ups and downs. A lot of times, follows the path and the direction of the oil and gas business. So we wanted to diversify outside of Houston, and that's where we all started, just discussing it, Tim, Tom, and I, what it looks like, how we're going to do it. Like Tim mentioned, we were having open conversations with the partners there on kind of what we were thinking. But it was a long time in the making, because it didn't happen for another 2.5 years until after we, started with the new company in GKF. But it was definitely a scary thing to be thinking about. None of us had ever done anything of the sort. And it's always, intimidating and, probably scary when you start your own thing like that. So not only, were we straight commission, but all of a sudden, when we do that, we're going to have to cover the overhead and the cost to run this company and run this business. So it took a lot of talking and discussing, a lot of prayer. But ultimately, we ended up deciding to make that decision, and we started Dosch Marshall Real Estate in July of 2017.
Yeah, it's hard to look back and say what if, but I do think if the ARA sale hadn't happened, I wonder if we really would have left, because I think we loved working with those guys. We have so much respect for everyone there, and I think we just knew things would change, and maybe we couldn't control as much of our business plan when we were part of a global company. And we also saw the opportunity, and I think the clearest opportunity was the other markets. I remember we had tried to go work in some other markets outside of Houston. We had had clients like Trammell Crow asking us, can you come help us in Dallas? Can you come help us in San Antonio or Austin? And when you're at a larger company like that, there's geographies that are previously agreed to. We had a very large team, like you said, David, 7 of us. Our counterparts in those other offices, it was normally 1 or 2 people. They were working hard, but they weren't able to fully service the market the way that we were servicing it, with just a completely different strategy in Houston. And so, when we were asked to go to those other markets, we said, sure, we'll go try. But then when we tried, we kind of got our hands slapped, and it became more conflict creating, and really wasn't good for the client, because then the client got in the middle of it, which wasn't what we wanted. And so we saw that if we ever wanted to really grow into the other major Texas markets, we were going to have to kind of do it our own way and break away. But I can't say enough how much we enjoyed being at ARA. So it's hard to say that if there hadn't been that huge event, we would have done it, because we still took it very seriously. Like Tim said, it wasn't an easy decision. And we knew that a lot of companies that start out, they don't make it 2 years or 5 years. They never see the success that they had previously. And so we definitely feel like, we've been blessed to have the type of success we've had. And, and like you said, David, we spent a lot of time meeting and praying about it and just making sure we were making the right decision.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't think we would have left had the sale not happened, because I think we had a lot of loyalty to those guys and respected them a lot. And we learned so much from them. I think there's a level of, we just love being there. We love working with them. And, when we did sell, the sale happened, and we really just put our heads down and worked for a couple of years. But we could just see it was going to be totally different. And it just, when you sell to a big company and you got thousands of employees versus, a couple dozen people working at the company, it's just a different environment. Decision making is different. Some of the core values are different, and so there are just things that, weren't bad, but just were not what we wanted. We wanted that entrepreneurial, kind of style of leadership and, operations that we had before. I think once you experience that, it's hard to get that out of your system. You kind of yearn for that. And so I think that was part of it. And I'm really thankful for the relationships that were still ongoing with all the partners there. I think the way we left, having those conversations really early and saying, hey, if we're going to go do this, we want to have, really good relationships. We want to, just kind of offer up what our ideas are to them, what the plan is, get their input, let them be involved in it. And, because we handle it that way, we've had very positive, long-term relationships and still do business together. Now that we're have our own company, and we're really in 2 different businesses now, but we still keep up those relationships and value their wisdom and input a lot. They've still been able to speak into to what we do and give us advice and help us as we've gone through challenges. And we've got to learn a lot from them, from all their experience.
You all recall back in, so we launched DMRE in July of 2017. And do you all remember what happened the next month?
Yeah, Hurricane Harvey.
Hurricane Harvey. And so it was just kind of, we were thinking, oh no, timing for this can't be good. Deals are going to just shut down. I mean, it was a 1,000-year event, probably one of the worst floods, ever, definitely here in Houston, Texas. And, we're just extremely concerned about what that's going to do for a newly startup business and all the deals that we're going to be working on. Fortunately, though, the city came together like I've never seen before and really bounced back. It was amazing to see the way the city of Houston responded to such a horrible event. But the way they did, the way they responded, the way everybody was lending in and helping each other out, it was something you don't see very often. So it was very uplifting to see kind of the reaction of the city and people coming together during a time of need, not just for a couple people, but the millions of people. And I think it allowed Houston to get back on track a lot quicker than you would expect from an event like that. And, the business got back a lot quicker and got back on track a lot quicker than you would expect as well after an event like that.
Yeah, we went from, literally walking out the door with our boxes from Newmark and setting up shop, in a temporary office space, to a couple weeks later, everything was shut down. We were actually getting in boats, little kayaks that we had bought, and, paddling through these neighborhoods. Some of the water was 2 feet deep. Some of it was probably 20 feet deep. There were live wires in it, trying to pull people out and help people. And it was incredible to see how the city came together. And then I remember getting to go into a house with Alan Harrison and, help out a family that I think the flood had been maybe 8 feet in their house or something like that, and just destroyed everything, went in and helped them kind of get their house back together and tear all the sheetrock out and stuff. So it was a really special time, and one of those times where you have to just you can't control anything, so you just do the best you can. You can't worry about what the impact's going to be to your business. You just try and help people, and then, surprisingly, it actually was probably the beginning of, one of the biggest runs we've seen in our business. The next kind of boom cycle that we had that went all the way from that second half of 2017 all the way to COVID in 2020. So it was an incredible market cycle.
Yeah, I remember we were in a boat, essentially a 17, 18 foot long, going down Willcrest, and the guy driving the boat had to be extremely careful because there were cars completely underwater, and he had to navigate, down the street and make sure the motor wasn't hitting the tops of those cars. During Hurricane Harvey, we were headed to an apartment complex over there to help some people get out. But I mean, it was very surreal, and it was it was a horrible event, but a lot of good came out of it. Like Tim and I both mentioned, seeing how the city responded.
Yeah, that was incredible. That's probably a good place to leave it on this episode. Us walking out of Newmark in our temporary space, Hurricane Harvey flooding Houston. It felt like maybe no one would ever want to invest in Houston again after that, because we'd also had other floods preceding that weren't as significant, but it was just kind of like, how could this happen? 50 inches of rain in 24 hours, the reservoirs being released and flooding hundreds of thousands of homes and apartments. So yeah, that was an interesting thing to happen within 30 days of starting the new company.
Yeah, that was.
Well, this is good, guys. Thanks for joining today. Hopefully our audience is getting a better feel for the business. I think, Tim, what you just said about things you can control, things you can't, that's a really good summary of the type of business that we're in.
No, that's right. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about the rest of the story. I think we'll have at least 1 or 2 more episodes and talk about the first couple of years of DMRE. We got off to a really fast start, and then we got hit by COVID, which everybody listening probably remembers how difficult that was and how that affected our business. And as much as that was a time of incredible, kind of pruning in our business and cutting back for us, it also is when we launched these other offices, Dallas and Central Texas, got launched during COVID. And our company became a much bigger company, went to covering the state and the Texas Triangle. And so there's a pretty incredible story there of how all that happened. So looking forward to talking about that.
That'll be good. And we'll get Tripp involved, which will be good to have Tripp on.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to that.
All right. Thanks, guys. Until next time.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.